the person who knows what to do when it comes to accessibility, the person who is expected to have the resources to work with individuals with disabilities or any needs. So I am thrilled that you're here today to be able to just add some more things to your knowledge and to your toolbox, if you will. Now, I don't know if somebody is kind of going to give me a 10-minute, 5-minute countdown or anything like that. I'd be delighted to have it. Just let me know when we're getting toward the end of my time. At TSHA, or a little bit about myself, I suppose, in addition to just my job, I have a background in deaf education from TU, and then I did get my master's in human relations at OU Tulsa in 2008. I was out of college for 25 years before I decided it was time to go back and get that master's. And I enjoyed the program, and I think many of you are in a very similar program to what I experienced. I also am a nationally certified sign language interpreter, and I've done that for about 30 years now as well. So that's allowed me to see both sides of what we'll be discussing today. I think before we launch in, I would like to share kind of my lay version of what the Americans with Disabilities Act says. Because when you're talking about accessibility and people with disabilities, you have to understand the Americans with Disabilities Act is often the law that comes into play. And what I tell people is that basically the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, says that if you're accessible to the people, you have to be accessible to all of the people. So if you're open to the public, then you need a ramp for people to get in with their wheelchairs. If you're open to the public, you need to provide the sign language interpreters or whatever other accessibility might be needed. And it's amazing in our field to see how often people do not know that. I think everybody gets that they're responsible for the ramp. They get that. That's something they put in with the building. But they really struggle with, why can't you bring your 12-year-old child to interpret for you? And that is a constant battle. We fight and we advocate for that every single day. It's amazing. What, ADA passed in 1990, and here it is 2020. And we are still struggling with this battle because it is something you don't run into every day, typically. So yes, your organization, your facility, wherever you might be working, you will be the ones responsible to pay for that sign language interpreter if that is what is needed. Now, you always want to start out by understanding a bit about your folks, about your people. So I'm going to back up and just give a tiny bit of background on people that are deaf or hard of hearing. First of all, there's the whole range. Obviously, they don't go into neat boxes where these are the deaf people and these are the hard of hearing ones. You're going to interact with people like you and me who occasionally say, what? Or huh? And then you're going to interact with people who are completely and profoundly deaf and won't hear a pot if you drop it behind them. So you're going to see that whole gamut quite likely in your lifetime and in your career. And every single one of those people is unique, and they have unique communication needs. Those communication needs are going to be impacted by not only how severe is their hearing loss, but when did that hearing loss happen? Were they born deaf, or did they lose their hearing as a 70-year-old grandmother? There's a huge difference between how those people are going to want to communicate and are going to be able to communicate. I think one very critical thing, in addition to understanding that the severity of the loss, the time that the loss occurred will make a big difference in communication, is also going to be, of course, the educational level. How much support did that individual get as a child in particular, growing up, to be able to learn the language, to be able to learn social customs, it's surprising, but to really understand the culturally deaf community, we sign culturally deaf because it's everything around that person is part of their culture. And if you've grown up deaf, then you have a separate language and you have a separate culture. And to truly understand that population, you have to understand they do not see themselves as disabled at all. They see themselves as a language minority, a cultural minority. So to understand that population, you need to think about them. My cat wants to participate. You need to think about them as if they were a minority group, almost, rather than a disability group, because they don't feel disabled. When they're with each other, there's no problem. It's when they're with us hearing people that the problem occurs. So that's one side. And please, I think there's going to be a question and answer period at the end, but if you want to throw questions in the chat as we go, that might be a great way to not forget them between now and then. So that's one group of people that you may run into. And then on the other end of that spectrum, you're going to run into people like you and I who lose hearing later in life. And all those people want is to say, I am not deaf. I'm just a little bit hard of hearing, okay? I just need a better hearing aid. You know? And that's going to be what they want, and that's going to be their approach to hearing loss. Very different perspectives on it, very different desires and needs. So again, you get to communicate, chances are, with the whole range, with the whole spectrum. So the first thing always with any individual with any type of disability is to ask them, what kind of accommodation do you need? Maybe all they need is for you to face them so they can catch some cues via lip reading to add to what they hear. Maybe they need some paper and pencil. Maybe they need some kind of an assistive listening device if you have something of that nature available. Or perhaps they do need a sign language interpreter. But ask them rather than telling them how you will accommodate them, because every one of those people has a different need for communication. Now, why should you accommodate? Maybe I should have gone there. I speak to so many different people. We train law enforcement officers on working with deaf and hard of hearing individuals. We train hospital employees and so on. Why should you care about this stuff? Because if you are in this field, you care about people and you care about them being served to the best of your ability wherever you might work. You want them to be served well. If they're coming to a hospital, you want them to be medicated correctly before they go home. And that means good communication. So these are reasons why you need to know a little bit about these things. Now, most of us understand how to write a note, but let me kind of cover a few things very quickly. Some things to understand if you're going to write notes back and forth to a deaf individual. Once again, remember, some deaf individuals who grew up profoundly deaf, 95% of those individuals had hearing parents who know nothing about deafness. So many of those children grow up language deprived with poor exposure to learning because their parents just don't know what to do exactly. So for those individuals who grow up under those circumstances with language deprivation, remember that short, to-the-point sentences are going to be easier to follow. Those of us who are in college English have learned to beat around the bush, haven't we? We've learned to throw all kinds of big words in there to make it sound really good and take up more space for that word count for that paper we have to turn in. That is not the way to write for many of our deaf individuals who have grown up deaf, perhaps in a poorer language environment. Now again, please hear, the signing culturally deaf community also runs the full gamut. Many of my best friends are profoundly deaf people with their master's degrees. They're teaching, they're out there in the professional world. They're going to be able to write essays back and forth with you, and you'll be able to see that very quickly. But a lot of the folks who run into needs for services and don't know how to access them and need your help to advocate for them, they aren't going to have such great language skills, and they aren't going to understand how to navigate the hearing world's systems as well. So those folks, you're going to need to write short, simple, to the point sentences. Also, because ASL is a very direct language, it does not beat around the bush. So stay straightforward, simple, direct sentences when you try to communicate. You can try mouthing and speaking clearly. If you are working, so let's say with a hard of hearing older person, one key thing, you might want to write this down, don't yell at deaf people. It just makes you look stupid, number one. It makes you look angry. And now people wonder why you're mad at them. And they're already nervous. They're in a situation, if they're at a hospital or some type of an organization, they're probably already under a bit of stress if they're seeing a social worker. So don't yell at deaf people. However, you do want to speak just a little bit more slowly and clearly. The key is to enunciate. Say your consonants, because we don't tend to say our consonants very well. And if you slow down a hair, speak a little bit more loudly and clearly, that will help those older people who are trying to catch what you're saying auditorily and put it together with what they can see on your face. A lot of people will tell you they do not lip read, but boy, if you take away that visual and now they're just looking at this, they will do much, much more poorly in terms of comprehension. So make sure you're facing them, that you're looking at them, you're not looking down writing on this paper the whole time you're asking them questions. We tend to do it. Even those of us in the field will remember and then we'll forget. So just make sure you look at them, speak clearly, give them a chance to see what's on your face. Okay, I don't know if you guys are out there ready to take a quiz, but get ready. If you can make my screen big, you might want to put me up on speaker view if I'm not already, because here is your lip reading quiz, all right? You can just put down for yourself what you think I'm saying. I don't know a good way to share it except maybe in the chat. All right, in the chat, put down what you think I'm saying. Ready? You have to be able to see my lips to try this. Here we go. One more time. Ready? All right, I see a comment or two in the chat. You guys are good. Yes, it was, how are you? However, I have done this for, you know, police department academy classes, and I'll see some big old guy in the back sitting up there saying, I am not saying what I think she said, because does it also look exactly like I want you? Watch it again. Here we go. So you might ask how somebody's doing and end up with a hot date. That's all I can say. But so lip reading truly has its challenges. I'm going to give you my 3-word quiz. Type in the chat what you think these 3 words are. Do they look exactly the same? Here we go. Ready? One more time. Ooh, I'm getting some great guesses in the chat. You guys are pretty amazing. One more time. Pretty close. Yeah, some of you are very, very close. Awesome, awesome, awesome. What I said was man, bat, and pad, like a pad of paper. Now, why do those look identical? Say M for man. The first sounds M, man. Bat is a B, bat, bat. Pad is a P, pad, pad. Your lips are in exactly the same place on those three sounds. Now try the ending sounds. Man, that's an N, man. See where your tongue is? Bat with a T, bat, where your tongue is. Pad with a D, pad. Tongue is in exactly the same place. So it does not matter if you are the lip reading genius of the century. You are not going to be able to see the difference in those three words. So what percent do you guess a good lip reader can catch? Throw me some percents in the chat. Your comments pop up so I'm able to kind of read what goes by. Keep guessing, keep guessing. Ooh, good guessing. Yes, good guessing. Guess some more. Everybody gets a guess. Pop a guess in there. All right, good guesses. A good lip reader tends to catch from 30 to 40% of what is said. As I tell school kids when I talk to them, if that was a spelling test, would you have passed if you got 30 to 40%? Not at all. So lip reading is really tough. It's very challenging. Now, I know people who do a lot better than that. Often they're combining a tiny bit of residual hearing with what they're seeing on your face. But some of my friends are amazing lip readers. It's hard. And when you're lip reading, your eyes get tired very quickly. And if you're an elderly person whose eyes aren't so great either, then that's probably not a good combination. So lip reading can be helpful. Certainly try that along with your book of tricks, your bag of tricks, but know that it has limitations. Know that writing can have limitations if that deaf person has grown up with strong American Sign Language. English is like a second language for them, and it's going to be a challenge to function with that. As we go on into looking at American Sign Language, let me give you kind of some literal translations, how somebody might write something to you in what is good ASL, but will look like very bad English. I'm going to give you a literal translation. Type in the chat, what do you think I mean in good English? Ready? Finish me, go store. How would you say that in good English? Finish me, go store. Be bold. Take some guesses in the chat there. This group has been bold. I love it. I'm seeing some good guesses. Yes. Finish me, go store. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Really good guesses. Okay, it is, and I think somebody got it. I went to the store. Because in ASL, the finish indicates the tense we're in. We're in past tense, finish. It's already happened. Me or I is the same sign because we're signing concepts, not English words. Okay, so finish, me or I, go, but we're in past tense, so we know that's went. Where? Store. The to the, we already know it's in there. We don't really need those words because in ASL, the go, it kind of includes the to the store in with the sign. So if somebody walked into you and wrote, finish me, go store, you would probably assume they weren't very educated or perhaps not very intelligent. They might just be a very strong ASL or American Sign Language user, and some people will write kind of how they sign. If they haven't had good support and good exposure to English development in their childhood years in the home, as in particular. So those can be some challenges with writing as well. So you all are going to have to be the advocates for our folks to say, okay, maybe writing doesn't work with this individual. Maybe lip reading won't work with this individual because they only are getting 30 to 40%. Maybe that's a good lip reader. And gentlemen, if you have a mustache or a beard over your lip, then that means it's even more challenging to lip read you. If any of you out there have false teeth, I talk to older people all the time. You cannot lip read somebody that has no teeth, okay? So wear your teeth. This is going to help a whole lot with lip reading and communicating with people, okay? So those are some features of communication, writing, lip reading. Let's look a little bit more at American Sign Language. For people who are profoundly deaf, ASL is just the natural language for folks like that because it's visual. Instead of forcing them to rely on their weakest sense, they are able to lean on their strongest. For deaf people, they cherish their eyes and their vision because that is their communication lifeline. So let me teach just a few signs. If there are one or two words or phrases you want to know, pop them down into the chat. Maybe I'll get to include them. I'm trying to think what you would most use. You might want to use name. Everybody, get your hands up. You're welcome to undo your video. I would love to see you. I appreciate that it is less distracting and maybe you can see me better, but it is really nice to talk to live bodies out there. So if you aren't in your PJs, would you go ahead and show me that you're out there and sign along with me, okay? Thank you, guys. Plus you got some cool backgrounds there, making me want to go to the beach. I have my interpreter ready background here, by the way. It is a tablecloth on my back. Sign language interpreters, we are ready with a dark, solid background to contrast to our skin tone. Okay, so you might need something like name. Right-handed people, you're gonna get your right hand up. If you are a left-handed person, you are gonna spell and sign with your left hand dominant, all right? So we could do alphabet, but I'm not going to. But the sign for name, my dominant hand is on top. I'm right-handed. Your dominant hand should be on the top. If you're left-handed, your left is on top. If you're right-handed, your right is on top, okay? This is the sign for name. So you might want to ask them for their name. Now, the wonderful thing about sign language is that signs stand for concepts, as I said, not for English words. That's the fun and the challenge for interpreters like myself. But so you can say name and just put a question on your face. Name you, okay? And you've asked, what is your name? Okay? So name and point to them. And hopefully they will be able to write down their name for you. Tell them, oh my God, don't sign it to me. Okay. Give them a paper and pencil before you ask that, right? You might, one of the more common things you might need to say is I. You're going to point at yourself with your dominant hand. Again, if you're a righty like me, and I know it looks left to me here on Zoom, I don't know how it looks to you. You might say, I am calling, like you're making a phone call, I'm calling for an interpreter. These are the letter F, by the way. Has nothing to do with the sign for interpreter, but the hand shape is an F hand shape. And it's like you're just interpreting away. Your dominant hand does the movement, interpreter. Because as a social worker, again, you may be the one that they expect knows how the heck to call an interpreter. So you're going to say, I have called, or I'm calling an interpreter, okay? If they've asked for that as their accommodation. That will probably be one of the main things you would need to know. What else? I'm going to check the chat. Did anybody pop something that they felt they would need to ask or need to say just as a stopgap for communication?
Somebody asked, how are you?
Okay, alrighty, good one. Let's see. Yeah, and at first I thought they were still guessing from that first, my first lip reading thing. Okay, so how are you? Your hands are kind of out in front, fingertips back to back, and your dominant hand rolls forward. How are you? How are you? I try to tell people not to shoot anybody, you know, you might want to put your thumb down. So how are you? Okay. How are you? And again, your face should look like you're asking a question. Your face and your body are part of the grammar of ASL. So don't say, I'm so mad that you were late, okay? Because they are going to believe your face and not your body language, okay? So you need to, if it's a question, make sure you look like it's a question. How are you? Oh, sad? I'm sorry, okay? There are sign language classes out there. We actually will be starting, we have a kind of a pop-up series through Jenks Continuing Ed starting next Monday. We have our regular, which will only be 7 weeks and only 1 hour per class because we are doing it on Zoom this semester, but we typically offer evening, non-credit, no grade, low stress, woo, classes, very affordable in the evening, spring, summer, and fall. They're usually 2 hours, 1 night a week. So if you're interested in learning a bit more sign language, then definitely check that out. Somebody's asking for, can I help you? The sign for help, my dominant hand is my right hand is going to help up my left hand. My left hand is in kind of a, I don't know, it's an open A hand shape. So my dominant hand helps my passive hand up. Now this is a great sign. This is what we call a directional sign. If I push it forward to you and have a question on my face, I'm saying, can I help you? Because I am helping you, or I'm asking if I can help you. Can I help you? If it comes back toward me, I'm asking you, can you help me? Okay. If you're saying, help me, without that question, then it's like, oh my gosh, help me, you know, coming back to me, all right? So that is a directional sign. Somebody said, how did we do call the interpreter? I am calling, or I called an interpreter. And actually this is just interpret, and you would show the person ending for interpreter, but we're not going to worry about that. They'll get it. Okay, so so those are some of the things in sign language, but we need to get down to the meat and potatoes that you guys need to know, which is, once again, that the ADA says that by law, you all are responsible as the business, as the organization, to provide that access. And when you provide that access, you can't say, bring your 12-year-old child to interpret for your serious hysterectomy, okay? This is not good. You can't say, bring your husband or your mother, because they need to be there as family. You need to contact and hire a professional certified sign language interpreter, because there's an enormous difference between a signer and an interpreter. For example, again, as I said, I'm a nationally certified interpreter, which is the highest level you can be. And I had to pass written tests. They don't even let us pick up our hands until we pass a written test that shows we understand what our role is and is not. We do not counsel, we do not advise, we are confidential. If we tell people, the deaf community is like a small town. Word will get around very quickly and we will never work again, okay? So confidentiality is built into what an interpreter is. But you want that professional interpreter because that covers your behind. That covers your organization's behind. The last thing you want to do is be sued because you did not provide good quality professional interpreter. If I screw up, they can sue me, but you did what you were supposed to do and you provided a certified, qualified person. If I messed up, You had no way of knowing that. You did everything you could possibly do. And believe me, again, it seems like it shouldn't be happening anymore. But I have a good deaf friend who went to take her PhD orals, her testing to get her PhD, and they said, oh, her university said, we'll provide you with an interpreter. They provided her with a Greek professor who fingerspelled her whole dissertation defense. Can you imagine? And somehow she still passed. So please get that certified, qualified person who is going to be better for you, because your interview, your meeting is going to go so much faster. Oh my gosh, it goes so much faster when you have that interpreter present. Are there questions specific? Because I do understand I'm probably down to about my last 10 minutes. I don't know if that's my 10 minutes to talk and then Q&A or what, but start putting any questions you have down there. So again, for those interpreters, and TSHA does, by the way, we are the oldest, longest interpreter referral agency in the state. As I said, got our start way back when. We are a nonprofit. We also do community outreach. We have a deaf services department. So if you have a client that's deaf and you don't know what to do because you know they need somebody to walk them through how to apply for housing, or they're not understanding this form they have to fill out, our deaf services department has deaf professional staff who can work peer-to-peer and walk them through all of those things. They need to find housing, create a budget, whatever it is, and we charge nothing for those clients. So you can refer them to us. Our deaf staff members will work one-on-one with them. They can call them through the video phone and work with them. That is part of what we do. The outreach part, like myself, we can go out and educate. If your business is just not getting it, I can come out and do staff trainings. We do not charge for that. Education is a huge part of what we as a United Way partner agency are. TSHA, again, is the name of the agency. So those things are available. And then if you do need that certified qualified interpreter, our third department is run very much like a business. Call us. We will find you somebody available at the time you need them. We will bill you. We will pay the interpreter. Okay, but you will know that if they came from us, they are certified appropriately for your job. So that again kind of covers your liability. I see that there are some questions coming up, and hopefully my timer will tell me if I'm running out of talk time or question time. Just verbally jump right in there when I'm out of talk time. So those are some important things to know. I think the Deaf Services Department will be critical for you all as social workers to know about, because you get that client and you just don't know what to do with them. You're struggling to communicate. You know they need more help than what you can provide in that one session. Our Deaf Services team really can walk them through. Our Deaf Services team can also help advocate if they aren't having an interpreter provided, so they can access services out there. I'm trying to think what else. In addition, it's great for you to know that there is technology that can be very helpful for many people too. There are programs through the state where deaf individuals can apply for things like an alarm clock that flashes or shakes the bed. They can apply for doorbells that flash. They can apply for smoke detectors that will flash and shake the bed. And those items are available at no cost through the state. They just have to provide proof of hearing loss and proof of income, and we can, again, get them connected to that application. We can even help them fill it out if the language is proving a challenge for them. So technology's out there, interpreters are out there, communication tips such as we covered about speaking clearly, making sure that your environment is good. Let me offer a couple of other quick communication tips. I know when people come to see me in my office, I'm working at home right now, as I said, this is not my office, but I often have music on. turn off the background noise. If you're working with a hard of hearing person, turn off your background noise. That's going to help a lot. Get in a one-on-one quiet environment, not in the middle of an enormous room with multiple cubicles and that sort of thing. And then, you know, check on that technology. Sometimes some kind of an assistive listening device where you speak into the mic and you can put headphones on. I had a 100-year-old lady and her son come in to see me years ago. She could not hear, and he'd had a stroke and couldn't speak. It was crazy. I was typing in enormous font, and I am a terrible typist. So I finally pulled out one of these assistive listening devices, and it allowed her to crank it up and hear well enough that I could stop typing. And those little guys run maybe $200. If you work for an organization that runs into hard of hearing people often, I think they are the best thing since sliced bread. I said I should probably get a commission. All right, we have lots and lots of questions in the chat. So let me see if I can answer some of those things. Wow, great questions. I will type my contact information in the chat, and tsha.cc is our website, so you can find out more there, and you can communicate me or other staff members there. T as in Tom, S as in Sam, H as in Harry, A as in Adam, cat, tsha.cc, okay? I think .com and .org were already taken. All right, the sign for social work, good idea. Okay, so the sign for help, remember? We're gonna kind of flip it. I'm gonna make my passive hand the helping up hand now, and I'm using my right hand to sign an S and a W, social worker. That's the sign because you help people. So an S is a fist, and then a W is right there. So social worker. So you are a social worker. That's the sign I've seen around here in Oklahoma. By the way, there are regional differences. Just like when I moved here, I had to stop saying soda and start saying pop. There's the same kind of sign language, regional differences, which again is why it's great to work with local interpreters and local people who know the regional signs. All right, let's see what else is in here. Yes, I'm happy to get the sign class information to Jennifer, who organized this, and perhaps she can share that out forward to everybody. And again, tsha.cc will also have that sign class information. You should be able to find it from there. Otherwise, I will give you my phone number. We are working from home, so my phone number if you want it. This will not be on the website, but I will give it to you. Shh, don't share. It's 918-639-9399. And again, that's my cell is 918-639-9399. So feel free to call me during work hours, please, with any questions you might have. Leave a voicemail in case I don't catch it. We are certified for medical interpreting. Yes, we're certified for medical interpreting, legal interpreting, court interpreting. We have contracts with many certified sign language interpreters, and we will not send you someone not appropriately certified for your job. So for example, in the state of Oklahoma, they're certified level 1 through 5, state certified. 1 is like an apprentice level. So we would send them on a very simple types of jobs or with a team. A level 5 would be the top, and national is considered above that. So if it were legal or mental health or that kind of thing, you're going to get a 5 or a national. Definitely certified appropriately for medical. Where to get clear masks? We had to get them from some wonderful little Facebook place that was making clear masks, I think. I think they are more findable now that the first wave of mask needs went by. I haven't actually tried a clear mask. I've gone to interpreting jobs with the mask my mother-in-law made for me, and we've made it work. We've managed to communicate. And then sometimes I can kind of pull it down if I've got the social distancing going on. because I hear the clear ones do fog. You have to kind of put Dawn dishwashing liquid or something on the inside. Again, you are welcome to unmute yourself and raise a hand as well if you have a question. Database website to find ASL certified hairdressers, realtors, etc. No, and honestly, those people don't exist much. There aren't very many fluent people in other walks of life, but you can call me, call us. If there is somebody that's out there, then we probably know, or someone on our staff will know, and we can get that information to you. There was, for example, a veterinary technician. There was a CNA that's deaf that worked in the CNA fields, but I think she just got hired by a school. How do you find professional interpreter? Call TSHA. There's several other agencies in the state as well. But definitely you want to go through an organization that knows ASL. I don't know if you all saw the debacle, but with like the Florida hurricanes and then the Nelson Mandela funeral where they had fake interpreters. Okay, that's because whoever sent them didn't know ASL. They didn't know American Sign Language. Maybe they knew Spanish or Greek or whatever, but they didn't know ASL, and the people moved their hands and they thought they were good. Don't get caught. That is horridly embarrassing and terrible. If they come through an organization like us, we will know they signed.
Can you talk a little bit about how you would communicate with deaf-blind clients?
Very good question. Communicating with deaf-blind has been very challenging. And by the way, to finish that professional interpreter, if you're not working with a local agency, you can also contact RID, Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf, and they do keep a registry of nationally certified interpreters like myself, and our contact information is there. But again, I really don't recommend that. We know the deaf people and we know the local interpreters, and some people just mesh better language-wise. So you're probably better to work with the local agency, because if that person's not free, they'll find someone else that is. Tell me one more time, Jennifer, I derailed myself entirely from your question.
Can you talk a little bit about how you would communicate with deaf-blind? Yes, please. Thank you.
Tactile signing, crazy hard. I've tried it. I don't understand it. But I have a friend that's been gradually losing her eyesight that we had to shift from regular interpreting over to tactile. And they will tend to lay their hand on top of the interpreters and follow that with what they're seeing, I don't know if they have any hearing at all left, and then they will feel the interpreter's hand. It's incredibly taxing. You're probably going to need 2 interpreters. You do need, by the way, 2 interpreters for any job that's more than about 2 hours long, because your brain starts to mush after a while. And those 2 will take turns about every 20 minutes. If it's tactile interpreting, they will take turns more frequently. It's very hard on the back. You have to kind of, hunch into that client. And it's a challenge. During COVID, it's been a great challenge because those people have been more isolated than ever, because interpreters didn't feel safe to be touched, and they still don't necessarily. There are some devices, some technology out there that's designed for deaf-blind. So if you have that situation, definitely reach out to me. And your visual person that's coming up speaking about visual services will have, I'm sure, some additional ideas. Okay. I will email the sign class information. Somebody says they have clients say they have difficulty hearing. Other people say they can't hear others but can hear me. I get that a lot. I get, why, honey, I have trouble hearing people on the phone, but I hear you just fine, from some of those elderly clients. And part of it is that enunciation. It is also, ladies, I hate to say it, but sometimes they really do hear the guys' voices better than yours. Men's voices tend to be lower, and as we age, it's not always, but most commonly, we lose those high frequency sounds first. So if you are a woman with a high squeaky voice, or if you have children with high squeaky voices, they may understand the man's voice or someone with a lower voice better than they are understanding you. Good question. technology without going through the state. You can purchase assistive technology. There are several different companies out there. Again, feel free to give me a shout. One that just comes to mind that's been around a long time. They used to put out catalogs. Now, of course, everybody just wants you to go on their website. Harris Communications is out there, www.harriscomm.com. harriscommunications.com, that's one. Soundbytes, Soundbytes is another one. Do devices specifically for people with hearing loss. There are others out there as well. But Oklahoma AbleTech will be a great resource for you. They can loan devices for up to 6 weeks for people to try out, and then you can return them. So you can try out this amplified phone. Does that work for that client? No. You can borrow a different amplified phone for another 6 weeks potentially. And that program is housed at the Oklahoma State University campus in Stillwater. And they can slice this out and they'll send along a return address label as well. So it's no cost to the individual. And I see somebody put that in here, actually. We must have been thinking alike. So they are a wonderful program also for kind of testing out. It looks like that's most of the questions. Jennifer, is there anything else, and am I out of time? Any specialty in PEDS, or are there any differences? Is that for interpreters? It definitely, interpreting for children is a whole different ball game, and probably the best people at it are school interpreters, and they don't typically work freelance in the community as often. But if we run into that situation, again, talk with us. I know I've done some forensic interviews with children, and those can be very challenging, and we may have to work together as a team because school interpreters aren't always certified appropriately, but they may be the ones most familiar with that child's language. Fantastic questions.
Okay, if everybody is done with their questions, thank you so much, Diana. I think your information was great and people are really gonna profit from it. And
I have to share 2 more signs, right?
Oh, okay.
Say thank you. Thank you. It's like blowing a kiss. You can say thank you. By the way, sign language has been great on Zoom. Thank you. And applause. I belong to a group, a Toastmasters public speaking group, and we're all using this to applaud for each other now on Zoom. Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed the experience.
All right, thank you, Diana. And our next speaker is Brian Zamarripa. And Brian, if you can speak a bit about where you work and a little bit about your disability as well, that would be great. Thanks.
Okay, can you all hear me? Let me make it to where you can see me too. Okay, and I think we're good. Okay, so thank you for having me. My name is Brian Zamarripa. I work for the Oklahoma Department of Rehabilitation Services in the Services for the Blind and Visually Impaired Division. I teach assistive technology there to our blind clients. And I'm also one of the people in charge of we have a lab for assistive technology on blindness there. So I'm also the secretary for I'm the state secretary for the Oklahoma National Federation of the Blind of Oklahoma affiliate. It's an organization made up of blind people for blind people. We have, through the organization, we provide lots of programs for blind parents, for parents of blind children. There are many, many programs that are there for Braille, to provide people information about Braille, blindness. Really, I see it as a well of resources for anybody seeking information about blindness, whether you're blind or work with blind people, yeah, it's a great place to go if you want to go to the website. It's nfb.org. Um, and I want to start by talking about my role in the Oklahoma Department of Rehab. So I teach assistive technology. I think Diana mentioned the term during her presentation. Assistive technology, the shortest definition I have ever come across of assistive technology was it's technology that allows us to access the world, and us being people with disabilities. Because assistive technology can be everything from high-tech options like software on a computer that talks. For example, I use a screen reader, and I will be talking more about that here in a second. But everything from high-tech to low-tech. I also use a cane that also allows me to have access to the world. I mean, I know what's in front of me. That suddenly becomes accessible through the sense of feeling, whereas to you it'd be through the sense of sight when you can see, for example, a pole coming up. On the side of the high tech, the screen reader, and that is exactly what it sounds. So if you can imagine, you're using a computer, all the little icons, every single object on the screen. I'm able to use the keyboard to navigate to each one of these objects, and the assistive technology reads that to me. You guys actually might be able to hear it as I move around. Well, maybe. Actually, hold on. Can you guys actually hear me?
We can hear you, Brian. We're good.
Okay, because it suddenly went all silent, sorry. Okay, I know exactly what I did. In order to keep it from talking, I muted it. So that was all my part. Okay. Let me get back to where I was here. Okay, so assistive technology allows us to access the world, being digitally or just go into a building and being able to read the braille on, say, elevators. My specialty is more on the digital side, so that's kind of what I'll be talking most about. And so I use, for example, this screen reader to access things like documents, emails, websites, and anything that really, I use it mostly for my job. I'm a student at TCC, Tulsa Community College, and I use it for that purpose too. So I get to see not only assistive technology on the side of what we do with the state, training our clients. I use it every day. I have to use it for everything I do, especially on the computer. So I get to see all the sides of assistive technology. But it doesn't just stop with assistive technology. It's also to do with accessibility. So, for example, if I go to a website, my assistive technology might be able to read things to me, but if something is not accessible, the screen reader will go right over it. It's kind of like if I were to give you a piece of paper and you can tell that there's words on it, but the words are very blurry. You're going to need something to clear that, to clear that up. So you might run it through some software on a computer, and it might clear the words up and allow you to see what's on the piece of paper. That you're using technology to access what you couldn't access before. And that's essentially what we're doing. And before I go too deeply into blindness, I do want to say that this applies for all kinds of disabilities. There are people who can't use their hands as well, may have some dexterity issues. In my line of work, I see people with multiple disabilities all the time. I have a couple of clients with some dexterity issues that allow them to, they can only use one hand. So they may need to use things like switches, where they're not actually using the keyboard, but they're controlling their computer with maybe a switch where they can just press it with their hand or something like that. That would be a form of assistive technology. But getting back to the accessibility portion of it, the websites and things we come across, we can never tell if it's going to be accessible or not if we've never actually visited. So what I do, part of my job is to go and, for websites such as the we did the OK House website of Oklahoma. We made that accessible because that's a high traffic area where lots of people might be going to get some important information or looking up the representative. So there are people like me who go and test these websites for accessibility. But I do want to talk about things that you guys can do. The people who are not the web developers, who are just the ones that are working with or around blind people or people with disabilities, what you can do to make things accessible. In the blindness side of things, I recommend with sticking to the bigger companies. So for example, if you're going to send me a form through email, it might be tempting to use, a website to create a form that, the form might look pretty and it might have all these fancy fonts and everything. And the website is very intuitive for you to create the form, but it may actually be not accessible to my screen reader because of all the fancy fonts, and maybe you have pictures in there that are not described. So when I say go with the bigger companies, I mean Google, Microsoft. Those companies have platforms where you can create forms and you can create documents. We're all familiar with Microsoft Word. Google has Google Forms. Knowing that you can go in to those platforms and everything from the creation of the form to the person filling it out is completely accessible. So, when in doubt, just go with the more recognizable company. And I have a perfect example. When I was doing a presentation for school, for one reason or another, they were requiring us to use, I think it was Prezi slide presentation. At the time, I don't know about it now, Prezi was not accessible with screen readers. So that requirement had to become, that had to be changed for me. That had to become an accommodation. I had to use Microsoft PowerPoint. Now, the content of the presentation was the most important thing, not what we used. So for that to be a requirement was actually a hindrance. It was an accessibility issue to require that for everyone without knowing whether it was accessible with a screen reader or not. So to be safe, go with something like Microsoft PowerPoint. That's completely accessible on all sides. So if you are looking, okay, sorry, you could probably hear my screen reader in the background. Yeah, so other ways you can make things accessible from just a blindness perspective, and what I see come across as an employee of DRS, and even on a daily basis with just regular emails we get, and even social media posts. Whenever you post a picture, try to describe it as much as you can. A lot of times what I'll get is a flyer, for example, and the flyer will be what my screen reader identifies as a graphic or an image. And that's all the information I get. I don't get anything about what is contained in the image, and less about what kind of text is in the image. So it might look something like you have the image attached, and then underneath you might want to say, picture has a, describe the picture, I don't know, a waterfall, and the the text says, come take a vacation, anything. Describe what the image says. Make sure it's clear what you're advertising. Because our assistive technology, as great as it is not there yet where we can actually read pictures. There, in some cases, we can, but I will say to play it safe, always try to describe as much as possible. I think that's the best thing on both sides to save us a little bit of grief on that one. So let me get down here. Okay. Now, I do want to extend an offer to everyone, and I will have somebody send out my information to all of you, because if you're wanting more training on accessibility, for example, if you want some training on Google Forms and how to make it optimal for people with a visual impairment, I'll be glad to provide training on those specific things. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to go deep into each one, but sometimes you might want to create a survey, or as a teacher, I create tests for my clients, and I know that whether they're low vision or they're screen reader users, they might be using a magnifier too, depending on that. I can be confident that, for example, Google Forms is going to have the accessibility that they need. And the reason is because these companies have accessibility teams dedicated to make sure that these products are accessible for anybody who goes on their websites and uses them. Prezi is not as well known as Google. People don't just know what that is. PowerPoint, I think, is a lot more recognizable. So, I'm willing to bet that Prezi doesn't have their own accessibility team, and because of those kinds of things, they are going to be a little bit hard to use. So, I want to talk a little bit about working with blind people, and whether that's in the workplace or with one of your clients. I have some rules here that I actually got from the nfb.org website. I want to talk about a few, and these are geared towards blindness, but really you can draw parallels with many disabilities, a lot of disabilities. And actually, a screen reader is not just for blind people. It also benefits people with dyslexia. And if there's any other cognitive things that you may have that keeps you from reading print, the screen reader, or even print for a long time, the screen reader can be a great option for you. And these screen readers and assistive technologies come on just about every device you can think of nowadays. I'm using one on my computer. I can pick up my phone and it'll start talking. Tablets, TVs, anything you want to use most likely has voice or Zoom or something that you can tap on to kind of just to make it more accessible for you. So Leaving accessibility, I know I'm moving a little bit fast, but I do want to give enough time for people to ask specific questions I can go into. But I do want to read some of these rules, if I may. Well, they're more like suggested guidelines, but I think they're very helpful. Okay, so the first one says, I'm an ordinary person, just blind. You don't need to raise your voice or talk to me in any different way that you would anybody else. Also, if I happen to be with my sighted spouse or my sighted friend, don't ask them what I want. Please ask me directly. They may not know what I want, and you know, I'm expecting you to speak to me directly, and especially if I'm speaking to you already. You guys have, you know, we as blind people, how many times we face the we don't know what to do because we're talking to somebody and they'd rather look and talk to the person that we're with than us directly. It happens more than you think, honestly. But yeah, that's the first one. So the second one is, if I'm walking with you, please don't take my arm. Please don't grab my arm. I will take yours, or I may choose to use my cane. Blind people are just as different. You know, what I may want in help may not be what the next blind person you meet wants in help. For example, I like to figure things out on my own a lot. When I come to a new place, just like you may look around your environment, I like to walk around my environment just so I can get a feel for the space and just orient myself. Now that looks to people like we're lost or we just don't know where we're going. The best thing to do in this case is just to come up and say, you know, do you need help? And if they say yes, then great. If they say no, then, you know, that's it. You know, they said no and you say, okay. But the best thing to do is ask, because the blind person may just be exploring and taking in their environment just as you would when you go into a new place and look around. So, and if I do need help with something, say if I can't find a chair, maybe it's crowded, you come up to me and say, can I help you? I say yes. You may ask something like, how may I assist you? Or I may just straight up tell you, can I take your elbow? And I will walk a couple steps behind you. Or I may choose to follow you. I may walk behind you with my cane. And as I'm following you, it would be helpful, if possible, to say left, right, whenever you turn. I like to tell people to tell me a story. I think that's the best way, because you can make conversation with people. It's a good way to meet people, I think. And so, you know, as you're following them, you're making conversation and you get to your destination and there you are. So those are just some tips on leading blind people and just kind of interacting if you're not sure what to do. So, and I promise I will answer any questions. I'm not looking at the chat if you're putting any questions in the chat. I can look at that in a little bit and answer your questions. Okay, so the next one is, don't avoid words like see, look, watch, and any kind of vocabulary like that. I use them too. I know it's kind of, you know, we want to be aware and we don't want to offend each other. And when you meet a blind person, you may not know what to say. But yeah, so just use the vocabulary that's normal to you. You know, I like this one because somebody once told me, you know, when I talk to my blind friends, I talk to them as if I was talking to somebody on the phone. I may still use words like see, watch. Did you watch Game of Thrones the other day? You know, I can say those things, but I may not point out something I just saw, like, oh, look at that over there, because my friend on the phone may not see it. He's not going to see it. He's on the phone. So it's the same concept. But we don't change our vocabulary. It sounds really weird to say, you know, I listened to the news last night. It's just very common for us to say watch and see. So you will hear us use that vocabulary, and so please be comfortable. And this way, you know, it makes you comfortable and relaxed. You're not having to constantly be worried about what you might say. And so I think it puts both of us at ease. Okay. Okay, so this next one. Okay. My sense of hearing, touch, smell, taste, any of those did not improve when I lost my sight. I simply may utilize them more than you do, so I may be more trained in that in doing so. Every time I talk to somebody about this topic, the best way I can explain it to them is if somebody underwent some kind of training to navigate in the dark. You know, you would have to rely only on your hearing. So you would have to always be listening out for things. As I understand it, sometimes the military or even firefighters, I've talked to a fireman who said, yeah, when you're in the middle of smoke, you can't see. So there are times when they are trained under blindfolds or trained without using sight. And, you know, we have to learn to adapt that same way. It's not that our hearing is physically better. It's just that we might be more aware of the direction something is coming from, distance, even how big the object is. We have to get all that information from sound, whereas you can, you know, just look over and tell. And so we have developed a quick way to do that, you know, just from doing it a lot. If you were able to hear my screen reader, I have it, I like to say I have it at 1,000,000 miles an hour, but it is very quick. It's very, very fast talking. And the reason is because, you know, when I first started using the screen reader, it was slow. After a while, when I got used to it and trained to listen that fast, I got faster and faster and faster. So to you, it just seems incredible, you know, very, very quick. And to me, it was a process. It was a training. So yeah, that is the reality of what happens to the senses. I think they just become more aware instead of physically enhanced. So the next one is, I will discuss blindness with you, but it's an old story to me. I have just as many interests as you do. So yeah, a lot of times people will come up to me and want to immediately ask me about what happened to my eyes, or how did I go blind, or how long have I been blind? Was I born blind? It's always a question centered around blindness. And I think that's very similar to other people with disabilities too. The first thing they see is the disability, and that's what it becomes about. So yeah, I mean, we want to make friends too. So, you know, if you want to talk to us about movies, shows, we like music, everything, you know, whatever you think you like, we do too. So, yeah. And, you know, I'll be glad to talk about blindness and educate people whenever it's necessary. That is why I do, you know, the advocacy work I do with the National Federation of the Blind, because I think it's important to educate people. But, you know, blindness is my life, you know, we can't turn this off. So when you are in the mood to talk about you know, blindness and how it works and everything. We may just had a long day dealing with all that, you know, working with blindness and everything. So, you know, it might just be courtesy to ask before going into the question. So anyway, now the last one here kind of ties it all up. Don't think of me as a blind person. Think of me as a person who happens to be blind. So I like this because it puts the person with their personality, their likes and interests and everything first before the characteristic of blindness. You know, if somebody might notice that somebody has blonde hair or something, the conversation is not about only that, and then that is their only identity. You know, when the conversation becomes about one thing and one characteristic, you have just painted their identity to be that one thing. So we want to make sure that we accept people as the whole person, and blindness just being a factor of that. You know, it's just something that comes along with the person, and you know, it's up to the blind person how they handle that and how they deal with their blindness, or you know. So let me turn this back
I'll
up.
say your daddy.
Oh, we got a little one. Okay. So I now want to kind of turn it over to questions. I did want to purposely leave some more time for questions because I want to go into different things you guys want to ask about specifically.
Hey, Brian, can you really fast talk about conveying information? You know, is reading it once really good enough?
No. So why, you know, I'm somebody who may need something repeated multiple times. So my preferred format may not be a reader. So if I have somebody reading something to me, in order for that information to sink in, I may need you to read it many times. Because my preference is more of a, you know, I'd rather read it myself, and I'd rather use my screen reader on the computer to just go, you know, if I didn't understand a word or wanted to know how something was spelled, to make sure, you know, I chose the right option if I was doing like a test. I need to be able to do it as many times as I want. So if you're acting as the reader for somebody who is blind, they may ask you to read it multiple times. They may even ask you to spell out a word. So yeah, that's a good question. And again, the best way to know is to ask them. Just say, do I need to repeat this? How can I best convey this to you? And you'll find that most of the time the person knows exactly what they need, and they will tell you. So I'm going to head over to the chat here and see if there's any questions. And if people are please welcome to unmute and ask me any questions that way too. Let's see. Let me open this up.
Hey, Brian, can you talk really fast? So a lot of these forms are confidential. So if they're asking them to fill them out in the office, is it okay to just do it in the waiting room, or should they take them back into another room?
No, you always want to keep confidentiality. You know, confidentiality is a big part of my job too. And like I said, we deal with, we have clients with multiple disabilities. So occasionally we'll get, for example, a deafblind client, and we'll have to use assistive technology like Diane was talking about earlier with the microphones and maybe the device, the pocket talkers and things like that. And we don't want to be sitting in the waiting room reading that out loud through the pocket talker where the world can hear. Because at that point, it's not confidentiality anymore. We want to make sure that we respect that according to the disability. So yeah, you will want to make sure that you provide the environment suitable for confidentiality. Okay,
I had a quick question.
go ahead.
So I manage our organization's Facebook page and a lot of our online technology. I really struggle with figuring out ways to do the descriptive text for my images for somebody who is born blind. Do you have recommendations on where we could go so we can learn how to best describe our pictures?
Okay.
Am I making sense?
Yeah, for the most part, I just have a question about, well, I will say this. For somebody who's born blind and then gone blind later in life, the descriptions of things like that wouldn't make much of a difference to how you do them. You just want to make sure that everything in the picture is conveyed in words. When we do accessibility testing, we tell people if the picture was removed, if there was no picture, how would you describe that in only words? Sometimes Facebook will try to describe something and it might say person standing next to tree. Well, it doesn't really convey the message. That's exactly what it might be, but there might be maybe a logo in there, or it might be representing something. So you want to make sure you describe the actual meaning of the picture along with exactly what you see in the picture. Does that make sense?
I think so. I think what I sometimes get concerned about is, I know you mentioned that sometimes it can be exhausting to listen to all of that text.
Mm-hmm.
And if I have like a long article, like a blog post that I've written, and then I have images splattered in, that's a lot of listening.
What I've seen work for the most part is when those images come up within the article, maybe have like a parenthesized section that explains what the picture is, maybe like a footnote or something, because many of us have screen readers that will read it out loud, and we'll be able to go back and forth, read as many times as we want the information. So if we don't catch something the first time, we could all go back through it. So yeah, more information is usually good if it's meaningful information. You don't want to necessarily go off on a whole tangent or maybe be redundant about something that has already been mentioned. So if you've already described the picture in the article, you don't want to have a parenthesis.
I'm trying to take a CEU.
Yeah, you don't want to have.
Took me all last evening to find it on the phone.
Oh, we have somebody talking. But yeah, you just want to make sure that that picture is well described, whether it's in the text of the article or within maybe like a footnote under the picture. Sometimes you might see an option for alternative text. I know, for example, on Facebook, there is a way to add alternative text to a picture, and it allows you to, if the picture already has text on it, you can write out exactly what the picture says. That way the blind person can know what the picture says. Because like I said before, for us, if that text isn't there, it just says image, it says graphic. Sometimes it'll be a link to something, but we don't know what the link is because it might have it in the text of the picture. And if it's not plain text, we don't know exactly what it is. So hopefully.
Raymond Williamson asked, are witnesses required when signing documents? And maybe you can explain how we sign documents, Brian. The technique we use.
Okay. Oh, I got you. Okay. So for signing documents, we tend to maybe fold and or mark in some way the part of the paper where we want the person to sign. For example, when we have a client check out some equipment, we'll have them sign a loaner form. So we'll kind of fold and crease the paper right along the line that they need to sign on, and that allows for them to have a tactile way to know that they're going straight across the line or know exactly where to put their pen. So as long as you have some sort of tactile indicator, I think that will be sufficient enough for them to understand. Now, you will come across people who won't know, so that is a good first technique to go to. I have had people where they will try to make a mark, like a tactile mark, and that can work. You just have to make sure they're able to feel it. And yeah, this can be depending on the person's disability too. You want to make sure that the way of marking that you're using is able to be felt by them, because we have run into people with neuropathy that weren't able to feel the marked line that we provided. So we had to come up with an alternative. We also have, in the assistive technology realm of things, on the low tech side, we have what are called signature guides that some people use. And these are these little, they're about index card sized with a cutout in the middle, where they can put their pin, and you would just situate it where they need a sign, and they would be able to do that. But those aren't readily available everywhere, so I would just go with the creasing the paper method. I think that is the best way for most people.
Another lady asked, how do you approach bilingual people that may have similar disabilities? I'm bilingual and just want to understand how to communicate effectively and fairly. Thanks for your.
Okay. Now, I'm not quite sure what you're asking there. So you're saying if you have a Spanish speaker who's blind and you're not able to communicate in their language, is that the question, or maybe I'm not understanding it correctly?
Well, I don't know. Could you unmute yourself and ask that question, Miss?
Because I know we have some clients that can only speak Spanish, and so what we do in the office, we either call somebody that can interpret, or I myself can speak Spanish, so I will just jump in as an interpreter or translator. So we'll do that if we need to communicate, but that's more of a language barrier than anything else. And for both DRS and NFB, we do provide information in Spanish and English for the most part. So that's information about services, programs, and anything we provide. We can get it to you in Spanish if needed, as well as in English. So, let's see.
Does anybody have any other questions?
I do want to say that, and like I mentioned in the beginning, I will get my information to Jenna or somebody that can send it out to everyone. But if anybody is interested, I am willing to provide more training on anything specific, like accessibility or anything you guys may come across, or even for general questions. I am happy to be available for that. We also give tours of our assistive technology lab up at the office, maybe not exactly right now because of the pandemic, but when we can meet face to face again, we can give tours. We're trying to figure out how we can do virtual tours. So that is a possibility that can happen. And so we can just show you around the different assistive technology we have for people with visual impairments, and just kind of how we access computers, and we can go into a whole more in depth. We can show you all the Braille equipment. I know Able Tech also has an assistive technology lab with equipment, so you can also look at their stuff. We do have a loaner program through the state, so any clients that come through and want our services, we can provide loaner laptops for them to use in the meantime. And if you have any questions about the National Federation of the Blind, you can also contact me on that. And there's a lot of great resources you can get about blindness there if you're interested in learning more about that, with everything in regards to interacting with blind people, working with blind people, serving blind people. It's all there. So I'll be glad to provide help wherever I can on that. So if we don't have any more questions, I think that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Brian. I think you provided some really great information.
Thank you.
And next up, we have Dwight Kelly, who's going to talk about learning disabilities. So Dwight, if you could introduce yourself and talk a little bit about yourself and where you work.
Sure. Hey, everyone. I'm Dwight, and really glad to be here tonight. Love talking about accessibility and having it sort of out there, especially in a social work context, because I think that as a profession, we don't do a very good job about thinking about disabilities, especially considering our ethics and our client population. So I am a recent graduate of the University of Michigan School of Social Work, and I am actively seeking social work employment. I am also part-time. I work as a learning specialist with individuals primarily with learning disabilities. So that's kind of on the side, but that's a little bit about me. And yeah, so I will pull up my PowerPoint presentation here. So let me just share my screen. And can everyone see that PowerPoint
Yes.
visible?
Yes, we can.
Great. So, and start from current slides. So wonderful. And I apologize, I'm just sort of stepping into the seminar now. So I would have liked to have caught the other talks and all, but I hope that this will be applicable. So I titled this what learning disabilities really are and why they should be on your radar, because again, disabilities are often missed, I think, in social work contexts, and learning disabilities are something that I think are a lot more familiar to people. They're sort of in the general parlance, but again, actually delving into what actually are they and how do they affect particularly adults is something that I'm passionate about, because I think that is often something that a lot of people just aren't familiar with. We often will say a learning disability, maybe in a school context, someone who's having a little bit of a extra hard time, but what do we actually mean by that? So that's the presentation. What are LDs? So I'll give an overview of that, break down the specific conditions that are within that quite large label, and delve into that a little bit. Talk a little bit about etiology. What do we know about these conditions? What causes them? And then really a lot on implications for client work as social workers, and how you can support your clients. I also include some stuff on supporting staff, because one of the things I'll talk about is how common these conditions are, and the likelihood that you've got people in your organization who may have learning disabilities is pretty high. And then I've got a bunch of resources sort of trying to address both of those things, clients and coworkers and staff members that may be in your organization. And then let's definitely save some time for questions. And like Brian, I'm totally available outside of this if there's follow-up. So very happy to engage with people. So a little bit more about me. My bachelor's was done with a concentration in disability studies. And as I said before, I just completed my MSW. Before entering the social work program, I worked for almost 4 years in university disability services at the City University of New York in New York City. So I had that experience too, which I bring to this. And then I mentioned that I do the learning specialist, and I've worked in a couple other contexts as a special educator supporting students with different disabilities, but mostly a focus on learning disability. I'm also have a learning disability myself, so I'm proudly dyslexic, and I'm pretty out there with that identity. Speaking of which, this presentation may contain some dyslexic spelling, so this is my way of putting that out there, so that it's not a concern for any of us, and you may just find some dyslexic spelling as we go. This is not new for me, so this is a note I left for my mom when I was 9 years old, and you can see right, the characteristics of dyslexia, which is really missing some of the speech sounds, which has a really direct impact on spelling. Also not able to visualize the word always, so not always able to spell sight words and that kind of thing. So that's a little bit about me. So what are learning disabilities? Because as I said, it's I think a frequently misunderstood, kind of overused term. I think a good definition comes from the Learning Disability Association of America, which they really laid out. So learning disabilities are due to genetic and/or neurobiological factors that alter brain functions in a manner which affects one or more cognitive processes related to learning. These processing problems can interfere with learning basic skills such as reading, writing, and/or math. They can also interfere with higher level skills such as organization, time planning, abstract reasoning, long or short-term memory, and attention. So there I think that we have all of the basic components. These are genetic conditions. They're neurobiological. They tend to be highly heritable. If you have one parent with a learning disability, there's a 50% chance that children of a couple will have learning disabilities. They're neurobiological also in the sense that these are generally not acquired conditions. These are conditions that have to do with how the brain develops in utero based on that genetic information. And so learning disabilities are congenital disabilities, if we want to think about them in that way. And as we see, we've got the basic idea that this is going to be affecting things like reading, writing, and math. I think those are some of the primary areas. But one of the reasons why I like this LDA definition is that it really talks about the higher order skills, the organization, time planning, working memory, attention, these kinds of things. Because at the end of the day, learning disabilities are essentially processing conditions, processing disorders. And when you think about it as a processing disorder, you begin to realize the extent to which these conditions can impact people far beyond specific domains like reading or spelling or math. So a little bit more information. There's a distinction between specific and general learning disabilities, which again is part of sort of the confusion. So A specific learning disability, which is mostly what we mean when we talk about learning disabilities in this country, is the conditions like dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, and sometimes we mean ADHD. ADHD is not technically a learning disability, depending on how you classified it, because people tend to think of ADHD as more of a behavioral thing. But there's a lot of comorbidity between specific learning disabilities and something like ADHD, which I'll talk a little bit about later. But basically, they're called specific learning disabilities because there's a relatively specific area of deficit. A general learning disability is another term for intellectual disability. And in fact, if you go to the UK, when they say learning disability, they typically mean intellectual disability. And they call learning disabilities specific learning difficulties, but we call them disabilities, which I like because I think that it's important to emphasize that they are disabilities. And I'm a subscriber to the social model of disability. So I don't think there's anything wrong with the disability label, which I'm happy to talk about. So relatively specific area of difficulty. One of the models within learning disabilities is islands of weaknesses surrounded by a sea of strengths, which is nice. We should emphasize that sometimes those islands are frequently used. So if you have problems with, say, phonological awareness, as in dyslexia, reading, spelling, these are activities that may be fairly specific, but are highly used in our society, and certainly highly used in our educational system and our work system. So they can be specific, but also still pretty profound. In terms of cognitive profiles, we often talk about there being a sort of spiky profile. So where you typically would expect that someone would basically be pretty even on all the different cognitive domains. So whether it was their spelling would tend to match their expressive vocabulary, which would tend to match their working memory, which would tend to match their abstract reasoning, their visual processing. That would all be kind of a straight line. Well, with learning disabilities, and this is an example of maybe dyslexia, we tend to see a lot of unevenness. So there's strengths in some areas, and then there's specific areas of difficulty. And of course, with any condition or disability, these things are highly individualized, right? They depend on a lot about who that person is, what they're particularly bringing, the own manifestations of that disability, environmental factors, right, all of this stuff. So always good to remember that. We talked about them being genetic and developmental rather than something that is acquired. And they're very common. Somewhere between 10 to 20% of the general population is thought to have a learning disability. And some people would even put that number higher, because if we take ADHD, and for the purposes of tonight, I'm generally counting ADHD in some of the statistics that I'm using. Well, some people say that ADHD, occurs in 10% of the population. So if we add that on to, say, dyslexia, which they say 10, 20%, we could be even talking more. But the point is they're quite frequent, common conditions. So they're genetic, and yet they're very, very common, which begs the question, why? Because they must have, using evolutionary principles, there must have been some sort of evolutionary advantage to these conditions. And one of my favorite quotes about dyslexia is from the British neurologist Andrew W. Ellis, who said, "Whatever dyslexia may ultimately turn out to be, it is not a reading disorder." And that's because language, written language, entered into human experience relatively late in evolution. So these conditions were already there. They just maybe weren't manifesting problematically. So I think that that's an important thing to just sort of think about. This is obviously pretty speculative, but we do know that they existed, say, before written language. And if we take something like dyslexia, there's theories about how dyslexia and how ADHD may have been advantageous in different ways before the coming of written language, and certainly before the coming of universal sort of literacy and schooling, which is really a product of the last couple hundred years. And learning disabilities are generally hidden disabilities, which is always something to keep in mind. It makes it easy to miss them clinically. It also means that people who have these conditions are not required to disclose, which can be a positive and also a negative. One of the things that happens quite frequently is people with learning disabilities who have them don't even know they have them, or really choose not to disclose that information at all. And in my opinion, of course, that's a really personal opinion, but in a disability services context, we see a huge drop-off between the number of people who are receiving services, say, in high school versus the ones who are receiving services in undergrad. And we also see that even those students who are choosing not to seek accommodations are not doing very well academically in undergrad. So there's a lot of issues, I think, around the fact that it's a hidden disability, and it can sometimes facilitate a negative but understandable distancing from the diagnosis. And understandable, of course, because of the stigma and discrimination that is out there. So what are the specific types of learning disability? So I mentioned dyslexia. So dyslexia is a learning disability that tends to affect reading and other related processes. So we think typically reading, spelling as those primary manifestations of dyslexia. Spoken language tends not to be impacted by that. And spoken language, by the way, is something that we did actually evolve for as humans, came in much, much, much earlier than written language. Dyscalculia, or specific learning disability in math, is something that's going to impact someone's understanding of numbers, learning math facts and doing calculations, and tends to be more isolated to math. And then dysgraphia is a specific learning disability that tends to affect fine motor skills and handwriting. And then lastly, nonverbal learning disabilities are a slightly separate condition that causes difficulty with nonverbal cues like facial expressions, body language, and nonverbal learning disabilities is a somewhat controversial classification. You won't find it in the DSM, and you won't always find it on lists of different learning disabilities. Some people view it as almost a mild form of autism. It's those kinds of characteristics. So unlike the other ones, which tend to be language-based, nonverbal, of course, is not language-based. One of the things that I think is important in understanding when we talk about learning disabilities is these things are like any diagnosis, right? Just basically a circling around of different symptoms and clinical significance. So it's quite common, say, for someone who may have a specific learning disability in reading, right, or also known as dyslexia, to maybe also struggle in math, but maybe not to an extent where it really meets the threshold for having a disability. But there's a high degree of comorbidity between all of these. And that brings us to related conditions. So I've got dyspraxia down here, which is known as developmental coordination disorder. And this affects people with things like, riding a bike and coordinating walking and this kind of thing. And right, obviously you guys probably see a connection with dysgraphia, which is right also a fine motor, in this case a fine motor skill, but right, similar. And then attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which again is often included in the learning disability label, but is typically viewed as something that is clinical. I would also put down receptive and expressive language disorders, which are obviously related, and again is a question about specificity. So here, if someone has a receptive language disorder, that's going to tend to affect oral language as well as written language. And so if it's impacting both oral and written, we would tend to use make that diagnosis. That's diagnosis is more common rather than the dyslexia, which would be tend to be a more specific disability. And then language disorder is also something that's going to impact across the board, both spoken and written. And that's actually, I think, one that really needs to be on a differential diagnosis for something like dyslexia. Social emotional difficulties, anxiety, depression, these things are also really commonly seen with all different types of learning disabilities. And there's lots of different theories about, is that a chicken or an egg kind of situation? Is it the challenges that people are experiencing that's causing a secondary depression or anxiety, or is it also sort of within this developmental context, are these things co-occurring? So some of the research that I have seen tends to say secondary seems a little bit more plausible, but there's definitely people who think that it actually has to do with more of a developmental perspective. As social workers, we can only diagnose ADHD because that's really the only one on this whole list that can be diagnosed clinically. So typically when we're talking about evaluation for learning disabilities, anything beyond screening, we're talking about going to a psychologist, either a school psychologist or a PhD psychologist who can do psychometric testing. And that is what it is. That's probably a good idea, right? Because you have to kind of see where people are coming in across the sort of cognitive domains to really make these diagnoses with precision. And we can see there's so much overlap that it can be a tough business. But of course, when it requires neuropsychological testing, there's huge barriers that are put in place. Financial barriers, those tests tend to be quite expensive. Schools, for example, don't want to carry them out because of the cost of them and, of course, the cost of the services that will follow if a diagnosis is confirmed. So that's a major issue just to kind of keep in mind. So what are some of the behavioral manifestations now that we kind of know kind of the basic profile? So again, there's islands of weaknesses. But some significant areas of difficulty, and some of those, those are the islands, right? And some of those can be pretty significant. Again, I'm sort of emphasizing that these are real and significant disabilities because what I'm seeing both sort of on the professional side and on the individual side, the client side, is that these things tend to be sort of discounted. Not seen as a real disability, and that has all sorts of implications for accommodations and for services for adults, because we tend to think of these conditions as existing only in childhood and only in the context of school, when in reality they're lifelong conditions that impact people in the workplace and that impact across the life course. Processing speed is a significant behavioral manifestation. So regardless of the specific diagnosis, whether it's say ADHD or dyslexia or dyscalculia, one of the things that an individual may have, and again, it's individualized, but they may show slower processing speed. And that can have implications even when, say, you're not necessarily, in the case of dyslexia, even if you're not doing reading or spelling or writing, if you're having slower processing speed, that's going to impact you in even greater areas. reading accuracy or speed, right, would be a characteristics of dyslexia. Spelling, dyslexia, attention, that's obviously ADHD, but it could impact in other conditions as well. Organization, likewise. Working memory, our sort of memory system are similar to computer memory that allows us to manipulate facts, hold details in our mind while we work with them. Well, this is something that's definitely a characteristic of ADHD or certain forms of ADHD, but it can also occur in other learning disabilities. Language skills, right, for many of the learning disabilities, mathematical calculation for dyscalculia. Okay, so hopefully that provides a good interview and overview, and I hope I haven't gone too fast. So I'm happy to also go back to that with questions, or if there are any questions now, people can jump in. But moving on to clinical implications for social workers. So I want people to just think a little bit about your practice context, wherever you're currently practicing, and just based on what we just talked about in terms of the characteristics of the different learning disabilities and the behavioral manifestations, all the different areas that could be impacted, how might that play out in your particular context or with the type of clients that you have? So some of the things that came to mind, obviously, if we have any school social workers, this is probably going to be a fairly common diagnosis amongst the population that you're working with. A large percentage of the students who are classified as having disabilities under the Individuals with Education Disability, IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, are going to have learning disabilities. So that's going to be a frequent thing, right? And I'm sure you see a lot of comorbidity there. I also think about literacy. There are lots of ways. I did my field placement in community mental health outpatient, and there's lots of ways that literacy could impact people, whether it's filling out forms, being able to apply for things such as filling out a housing application, dealing with an insurance issue, these kinds of things. So that's going to be coming up across the board. So yeah, filling out forms within the practice, right? My agency had a almost 30-page long intake, which, you know, we won't go there, but, you know, obviously a challenge for everyone, particularly a challenge for anyone who has literacy concerns, is going to be having to be filling that out. I mentioned dealing with insurance. I think manualized treatments deserve talking about here, right? There's a big emphasis on manualized treatments. I would always encourage people not to literally have people maybe reading from the book unless it's clear that everyone is okay in terms of their reading level. And, you know, I think much better to not read from the book anyway, but there's, of course, manualized treatments are a familiar thing in many social work contexts. And they brought up processing speed again as one of the more typical behavioral manifestations. And I think that this comes up a lot in cognitive therapy. We're asking clients to reflect on their cognitions in the moment, to talk about their experience and then step back from that and make a connection to analyze that. And so I think that someone who's having processing difficulties, that may take a little bit longer than we're used to, and we might want to think about ways in which we can address that. Also in psychodynamic therapy, similarly, it's not isolated to CBT or cognitive therapy. Again, we're asking a lot of people to really think about their experience in this kind of switching between telling, processing, making connections, which has a lot of demand on working memory and on processing speed. So in general, I think there's a lot of benefits to having a highly structured approach, so people kind of know where they're going. That's helpful for processing speed. It's also helpful for attentional challenges, to keep people focused and kind of know where everyone's going, and keep the therapist focused so that we're not being unnecessarily tangential in our presentation of information to the client. So again, all learning disabilities are hidden disabilities. So I think that there's a major risk of invalidation for the individual, both in the general environment, as well as within the context of a psychotherapy session. If this is off the radar, if they haven't disclosed it, if you haven't asked about it, and they're, say, talking about how they never have any time and they're not able to get everything done at work, and that's causing all of these implications, right? If you start to sort of take a psychological angle on that and say, is this because you're too overly critical? Is that a cognitive distortion that you have, right? And you're actually missing a developmental condition they have, and maybe they've had since childhood, right? Or they would, right? And these are lifelong conditions, then that could have a significantly invalidating impact on the client. And of course, this is also true whether they're in school or the workplace. If the people that they are interacting with don't know about it, and again, it's not visible, then they could be making judgments about them. So this is quite, sort of frequent within, when we think about learning disabilities, right? People often are told that they're not trying hard enough, that they're stupid, right? And these things get internalized. So quite often you'll hear clients talking about, maybe if they weren't diagnosed until adulthood, I just thought I wasn't up to it. I thought I just wasn't trying hard enough. And again, I emphasize, don't underestimate the impact and the significance of these conditions in adulthood. If someone, his processing speed is really low, most tasks are going to take them longer. And so this is going to have a real impact in the workplace, in their general life, in terms of getting things done that they want to get done, etc. So I think that the hidden piece, is important to note, right? It's incumbent on us to be screening for this, to be asking about it, to be validating it when it does exist, right? Keeping in mind that these are significant disabilities and not just something that happens in school. But also, right, it's a conversation with the client about self-disclosure, about making sure that employers know, that schools know, so that services can be put in place, and that so individuals know if this is coming up in day-to-day life and relationships. It's important for those people to know what's going on. And also because these conditions are hidden, and because these conditions are viewed as only something that happens in school, these conditions are also frequently misunderstood among even the individuals who have them. So I think that there's definitely a need for psychoeducation there. There's lots of resources, some of which I have at the end of the presentation, which can be shared with clients. And there's just a lot of work that can be done within the session just to explore what's going on and how it might be impacting someone, and how it might be interacting with another diagnosis, and different kinds of challenges. So this also brings up intersectionality and privilege. So how something has manifested will, right, unfortunately, be oftentimes shaped by different privileges and identities. So a couple examples, right? Female students are diagnosed with learning disabilities much less, not because they occur less in a female population, but because female students tend to be better behaved, right? They just kind of, right, maybe stay quiet, and not sort of be the class clown, where a male student may do that as a way of sort of coping with difficulty, so they are able to get screened. I mentioned socioeconomics. Underfunded school districts may have a real unwillingness to evaluate for learning disabilities due to the funding implications that are tied to those services. May also have staff who are not familiar with it. Teachers in general do not get enough background information on learning disabilities, so it's often not picked up. And then educational history also has an impact. If you have had a disruptive educational history because you've moved around a lot, because dealing with different things in your life, then it's going to maybe make the diagnosis of a learning disability more challenging, right? It's versus someone who's at a well-resourced school where there's a lot of stability in their lives, and yet they're still having difficulty. And so it's an easier thing to sort of identify. So these are all important factors to consider. Also, so I did a little bit of this with some of my clients within the community mental health clinic where I was working with. And some of the questions that came up was, is this going to be something that's going to impact my children? So you can talk to clients about that. As I said, these are highly heritable, but they're not necessarily something that people should worry about, right? There are resources out there, and it can be a powerful sort of experience as well as in terms of having a disability. And that's certainly, I feel, been something that's been ultimately enriching. So I think there's a lot of importance to being learning disability informed in your clinical practice. And we've kind of talked about some of what that might look like. And just to sort of summarize, thinking about job and school implications, thinking about identity factors, thinking about intersectionality, but also what does it mean to have a disability for someone who has a hidden disability and it's stigmatized, and maybe they haven't been that open about it, don't know much about it. So obviously you never want to push anyone into embracing an identity that they don't want to embrace, but talking to them to make that connection possible, if it's something that they're comfortable with and want to explore, I think that there are a lot of advantages to doing that. The issues of grief and loss, people who have had educational struggles or career struggles, who maybe wanted to do something but felt like it wasn't going to happen because of how they were approaching their work and the struggles that they were having. Someone who wanted to go to college and then decided they couldn't. Someone who thought they were going to be a manager but can't deal with the paperwork, right? So these kinds of issues. Now, there's a lot of supports that can be applied, so none of that should be viewed as written in stone, right? But these are issues that people will bring if they failed out of college, if they've been struggling at work, that might come up as grief and loss. Obviously, issues of stigma and self-esteem, conditions that have been present and stigmatized since very early schooling, right, are going to have potentially long-lasting impacts on self-esteem. So that would need to be addressed. Again, thinking about employment and thinking about time management as something that can be worked on in session, a common manifestation of many of the learning disabilities, and so something that can certainly be addressed clinically. So I've been saying these are significant disabilities, so I'm trying to prove that here. So we see major challenges in high school completion, high dropout rates. Individuals with learning disabilities as a group attend college at half the national average, face over 50% unemployment compared to the general population, They're included among a third of all incarcerated people in the United States. And their lifelong conditions. They're going to impact across the life course. And they're going to compound with other psychological conditions and traumas. So one of the impacts that trauma can have on individuals is difficulty with attention and working memory and executive functions. Well, if you've started with deficits in those areas developmentally due to learning disability, and then you're dealing with the impacts of trauma, that's going to be a real sort of double whammy. So that's something that I think that we should definitely keep in mind. So what are some other things that you can do? Screening. So you can start with some informal screening questions. So it's always helpful if you suspect a learning disability to just ask if there's any history of special ed, or I just usually say special help. Not everyone is identified in schools, and often individuals are underserved in schools, but it's a starting factor to see what was going on. You can also ask about history of reading.
Dwight,
I heard my name.
you were muted and we couldn't hear you.
Oh no. When did I mute?
Just a second ago. It wasn't very long, but
Okay. So was I on this screen?
yes.
Talking about screen. What would happen? Well, I'm back. But yeah, just let me know if that happens again. But just talking about informal screening questions, it's always really helpful to say, how did you compare to your peers in school? Think back. And how do you compare to your peers now? And when we're asking about school context, that can be a really helpful question, because even if someone was in an under-resourced school environment, then at least you're getting a little bit of a comparison to how other peers were performing in that setting. And then you can also, hearing a little background noise, but you can also ask them if audiobooks are effective. This is a dyslexia screening question. But for dyslexia, right, the difficulty tends to be specific to written language. So if audiobooks address the difficulty and people love audiobooks, and sometimes they'll say, yes, I always actually read with audiobooks. That's a really good indication that you might be dealing with a dyslexia. There are also some standard questionnaires for adults. I didn't put the ADHD questionnaires down here because they're out there, they're easy to find. I put the dyslexia ones down here, which are lesser known. So there's something called the Adult Reading History Questionnaire. If you simply Google that, you'll pull it up. It's, I think, 10 questions or so.
Oh, Dwight, you got muted. Sorry. Can you unmute? Sorry.
Okay. Not sure what is happening, but so a more comprehensive screener is called the Adult Dyslexia Checklist, and that's also available online. If you simply Google that, you'll find that it's a little bit more comprehensive. I think with screening, right, it's always best practice to offer something with the results. So matching that with resources so that if you have a positive diagnosis or with a screener, it's just going to be a potential diagnosis, you want to be able to offer some follow-up or offer some resources that could help people. And so we will talk about resources in a bit. All right, so one thing with a formal diagnosis is it may not be clinically effective, and it may not actually have any direct impact on that individual's lives, because let's say they're not in school and they don't need accommodations in the workplace. Well, then there's really no point in getting a diagnosis unless there's something else that's sort of going on, or they really want to know kind of what their cognitive profile is. So always think twice about, is diagnosis actually going to get anything for us here? On the other hand, diagnosis can be really transformative for things like getting formal disability accommodations in place. Referral to adult basic education or GED completion, which are typically free programs in the community, can be helpful. Referral to learning or reading specialists. I would always recommend finding someone who's certified in Orton Gillingham or one of the main methods, and you can find that through the International Dyslexia Association's webpage. And offering audiobooks and text-to-speech, which are increasingly available. Every iPhone has a really great built-in text-to-speech and speech-to-text program, which can be really helpful to people, and it's already in their pocket oftentimes. If you do need diagnosis, you're going to go to a school psychologist or a PhD psychologist and ask for a neuropsychological evaluation. This will be covered by insurance if it's part of a larger assessment, and that's an important thing to keep in mind, because if you say you just want an assessment for a learning disability, you'll probably have to pay out of pocket for that. It won't be covered. But if you say that you want it in the context of a broader neuropsych, insurance will likely cover it. I mentioned the social model of disability a little bit before, and if this is new to anyone, I really would like to spend some time talking about it. But very, very basically, the social model is a reaction, a rebellion against the traditional way of which we think about disabilities within the medical profession, which is as individual difficulties, problem with that particular person that need to be worked on through therapy, through intervention. And it's not an environmental problem, it's really something that they have either right in their brain, in their body, etc. The social model of disability really challenges that and says it actually is not about who that person is and what different impairments or differences, bodily or cognitive, they may have. It really has to do with how society responds to them, how they say the built environment is for them. So the social model was devised by a group of wheelchair users who said, we could go to work and do a perfectly regular job at work if only we could get to our offices, right? If only we had a ramp and an elevator to be able to get to work. And it's really society that's disabling us by not providing those resources. And right, we could make a similar argument for learning disabilities in many ways, right? Certainly something like language, writing is a cultural invention. So by emphasizing writing the way we do in our educational system, we are having a disabling effect on an individual who is neurobiologically different and not as effective with written language. So I think that this kind of context can be really helpful for a client who's trying to think about what does it mean to really have a disability, and that this is not something that's just about me, and something that's just wrong with me, that these things really happen in a context, and it can be quite helpful to think there are resources out there, and this is not something that society should feel like it's unresponsible for. So that's always helpful. So considerations for supervisees and coworkers. So remember, 10 to 20% of the population and lifelong conditions, very likely that you have people with LDs in your staff. So remind people that LDs are disabilities under the Americans with Disabilities Act and other laws. And that opens up disability accommodations in the workplace, disability reporting for the EEOC, and hopefully a valued form of diversity in your office. So I think it's important to emphasize that. So some potential accommodations in a job environment might be text-to-speech or speech-to-text programs that are either available on the computer to help people who are doing a lot of typing and reading on the job. Maybe a private office. Typically, right, for social workers who are doing client work, that's probably more common. But if that's not common, you're in an open environment, that could be really hard for someone with ADHD, for example. And so that could be an accommodation. Electronic versus paper documentation, I think that could go both ways. For people, so it'd be about looking at the individual and seeing if the disability is being impacted by one of those and if a switch could be made. More time to complete documentation. I know, you say that with a bit of a caveat, but someone who's taking longer due to processing speed or due to a specific difficulty in writing, for example, who may need more time. So we're not talking about lessening the workload, but we're talking about maybe giving a little bit more leeway to get that documentation in. And then this brings up self-disclosure to clients. So when I had a text-to-speech system loaded on my computer and was using that as I typed in, we were entirely electronic, so I was needing to type while I was in session with the client. I did just disclose that. That's why I've got one earbud in. I would tell them so that they knew what was going on. And I found that to be a helpful thing that often then elicited self-disclosure on the client's part or curiosity. So that was helpful. And then with anything, when you're supporting a coworker, right, and certainly a supervisee, you want to be collaborative and problem solving with them to really understand, again, how does an individualized condition like learning disability, how does it, and what can you do to be most supportive. And I would finally say we need to be promoting reasonable and flexible workloads. I think that clinical work is really wild with the expectations on everyone, really inhuman expectations in a lot of our workplaces. And, this does not help anyone. And it especially can be an impact for people with disabilities, where, if there's a reasonable workday with reasonable breaks that allows someone who's maybe taking a little bit longer to get their documentation done to be able to accommodate that within a reasonable working day. Whereas if you're expected to see 7 or 8 clients and everyone's staying after 5 o'clock to get stuff done, someone's taking even longer, that's going to be really hard. So I think that we all need to be promoting better working conditions for all of us. So some resources. National Center for Learning Disabilities is really great. Learning Disability Association of America, likewise. And I mentioned the International Dyslexia Association as a good provider referral if you're looking for a learning specialist or tutor. Some other great books. This is by a British psychologist who does clinical work, focused exclusively on dyslexia. So if you're working with a dyslexic individual and it's coming up a lot clinically, I highly, highly recommend this text, The Dyslexic Adult by David McLaughlin and Carol Leather. I also like this book by Shirley Kurnoff, The Human Side of Dyslexia. And it really starts from early ages all the way through adulthood, and it's organized chronologically. And it's from a series of interviews done with individuals and families. So a really nice, personalized human perspective there. There's also something which it's not published, it's not easily found, but if you Google dyslexia and dyspraxia in adulthood, information for doctors and psychotherapists, you will find this document by Dr. Sylvia Moody, who provided this resource, which is definitely helpful for thinking about working with clients as a therapist. And then for ADHD, within the Treatment That Works series that people may be familiar with, there's something called Mastering Your Adult ADHD, which is both a therapist and a client workbook, which is really great. And some of these may be helpful for doing time management with individuals with different disabilities beyond ADHD as well. So that's it for me, and I'm available for any questions. Anything that people are curious about?
And please feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question as well, if you don't want to use the chat.
Getting lots of thank yous and thinking people want to be out of here.
So somebody asked to get tested for ADHD, would you go to a neuropsychologist first, or who would you go to?
I would probably argue that you should just go to a social worker and get it diagnosed clinically, unless there's a real reason why there's a need for a more thorough evaluation. That could be because it's a documentation requirement for an accommodation, although I'd really push back on that because a social worker should be able to make that diagnosis, or because there seems to be something else going on and there's a need to sort of delve into it a little bit more. I think ADHD is can be a really significant disability. Yes, it may be overdiagnosed. I think that I've worked with a few individuals who have really significant ADHD, and what I notice is that it can be a real barrier to introspection and towards sort of a recognition of what's going on. So people who are failing out of college who don't think that there's a problem. And so ADHD should not be underestimated.
It looked like somebody else asked earlier if there was a resource for suggestions of jobs or careers for people with specific disabilities.
I am not aware of any. I know that there are a couple good career guides, and I don't have the titles or authors off the top of my head for learning disabilities and for disabilities in general. So you could do a search out there. It's definitely been addressed a little bit. I mean, I think that what the literature emphasizes is that there needs to be a goodness of fit between the career and what the interests are of the individual and how their particular disability manifests and how they view their disability. So that's something that I think that can happen in lots of different careers. It's going to be very, very individualized, and it's about exploring that as an individual and maybe with the help of a professional.
Somebody else asked, does cognitive behavioral therapy work well for ADHD versus medication? Scheduled to specifically.
Yeah, I'm probably not the best person to ask about that just because I haven't done a whole lot of clinical work with ADHD, but I think that CBT can be effective, and it's going to be that same question with evaluating medications in general, right? Sort of clinical significance, desire of the individual. A lot of individuals, right, don't want to deal with the side effects. So it's going to be weighing that, and it can be obviously highly effective for some people as well. So try it. I mean, I always would encourage clients to try it if I feel like there's a need that's not being addressed just through therapy alone.
Someone also asked earlier specifically about trying to find someone to assess people, adults with learning disabilities? I know you don't know of probably local resources, but do you know of maybe national ones?
I think that the International Dyslexia Association is a good place to start. Someone who can assess dyslexia well is going to be often well positioned to assess the other disabilities as well. So I'd talk to them. I'd say it's a big challenge because this average clinical psychologist, may not and could potentially miss it if someone is generally really high functioning. So I don't, I know some people in the New York area because I used to work there, but yeah, I think it requires some looking and figuring out.
Any suggestions for a client that has told her supervisor that she has ADD numerous times? She's asked for quiet office, but continues to be put in an office with 4 other people that are quite chatty. It's not an issue of no space because another person has an office to herself that really doesn't need one. The client has medical records diagnosing this.
Well, it sounds like a case of disability discrimination to me. So I would appeal that decision, document your interactions, and potentially seek legal counsel. I mean, the sad news with all disability discrimination is that there are no damages built into the ADA. So you can reach out to the Office of Civil Rights and certainly file a complaint against an organization that you feel is discriminated against you. And of course, you can get a lawyer, but if it's between you and an organization paying legal fees, that can be quite challenging. So I think the best bet is to do a lot of advocacy and document this. And this is, the law is pretty clear, and employers shouldn't want that liability. But yeah.
That looks like all our questions. Thank you so much, Dwight. And if you could just email me your PowerPoint so I can send it to everybody else, we will be done.
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here. And yeah, Jenna, thank you so much.
All right, thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. Bye.